Money takes orders, not requests. Florence showed the difference. Job 22:28. Explained. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the words you send out return to you fully grown. And if you have ever wondered why your prayers for money felt like a plea that never quite landed, it is because you were speaking a request when your life was waiting for a command. In the book of Job, chapter 22, verse 28, it says this: "Thou shalt also decree a thing, and it shall be established unto thee, and the light shall shine upon thy ways." That is Job 22:28. And Florence Scovel Shinn would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The verse does not say thou shalt also request a thing. It does not say thou shalt also hope for a thing. It says decree. And a decree is the language of someone who already owns the house, not someone still knocking politely at its door. You have been asking for money the way a child asks a parent, softly, uncertainly, half ready to hear no. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this soft asking is exactly what keeps supply standing off at a distance from you. Because the law of your own rich subconscious does not answer to the tone of a request. It answers only to the tone of a command. And that difference has been hiding inside one small word in a very old book this entire time. So before we open the keys, let us put a decree of our own into your mouth right now. Something short enough to carry with you into this very day. Say it with me. I decree my good, and it is already mine. I do not beg for what is already appointed to me. My word is my wand. Again, I decree my good, and it is already mine. I do not beg for what is already appointed to me. My word is my wand. And if something in you just straightened up when you heard those words, if some old bent-over part of you just stood a little taller, type the word Amen in the comments below. Let it be your seal that you are done requesting and ready to decree. The first key is this. Notice the tone you have been using, and change it today. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that most people pray with a question mark hanging over every sentence. Please let there be enough. I hope this bill gets paid somehow. Maybe things will turn around soon, and every one of those sentences is a request wearing the costume of a prayer. But a decree carries no question mark at all. It carries the quiet weight of a fact already settled. Picture the difference between a woman standing at a counter asking, "Could I possibly have this?" and a woman standing at that same counter saying plainly, "I will take this." One is pleading for permission, the other is simply naming what is already hers, and you have likely done this yourself more times than you can count. Maybe you are the one who reaches for the phone to call about a bill, and before you even dial, you are already rehearsing an apology in your mind, already bracing for a no, and by the time the call connects, your voice comes out small, uncertain, almost sorry for existing, and Florence Scovel Shinn would say, gently, that this is not humility, this is a decree of lack, spoken in real time. You are not the only one who has done this. Nearly everyone has, because we were taught to ask nicely and wait quietly, never told that the very waiting was the thing keeping the door shut. It is not that money refuses the polite. It is that money cannot hear the uncertain, because your own subconscious mind, the faithful and literal servant that builds your outer circumstances, takes its instructions exactly as given, and if you hand it a question, it spends its energy hunting for an answer, instead of building your good. So today, catch yourself the very moment you say I hope, or I wish, or maybe, and quietly trade it inside your own mind for I have, or it is done, or it is mine. This one small shift, practiced consistently, moves you out of the waiting room and into the room where decisions are made, and it costs you nothing but attention. Try it on something small first, the next time you order your coffee, or answer an email, or greet your own reflection in the mirror. Speak as one who already has enough, not as one still hoping to be granted it. Say to yourself, privately, my needs are met, not my needs might be met. and feel that difference land in your chest. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the feeling behind a word is what plants it into substance. And once a decree is planted this way, it can only grow into its own likeness. A question mark plants a question mark, and it multiplies exactly what it is. This is my decree. My needs are met, and my word has already made it so. The second key is this: stop letting the number decide what you are allowed to say. So many people check the balance before they speak their day, and let that single figure cast a vote on every sentence that follows. If the number is low, the whole day gets spoken in a small voice. If the number is lower still, the whole day gets spoken in fear. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is exactly backwards, because the visible balance is only a photograph of yesterday's consciousness. It is a record of decrees already spoken. It is not a prophecy of what must come next. Imagine a woman who glances at her banking app first thing in the morning, sees a smaller number than she hoped, and then spends her entire commute rehearsing lack, murmuring to herself that things are tight, that she cannot get ahead, that this is just how it is for her. By lunchtime she has decreed poverty 7 different ways without ever calling it a decree. She has told a co-worker, money is impossible right now. She has told herself she will never catch up. She has looked at a coffee she wanted and quietly decreed, I cannot even have that. And then she wonders why the same tightness keeps showing up in her life week after week. It is not that the bank balance has real authority over her. It is that she keeps handing it authority every single time she lets it write her next sentence for her. And here is the part Florence Scovel Shinn wanted you to feel deeply. The number on that screen did not create her fear. Her repeated agreement with the number is what kept renewing the fear. A balance is simply a report, and a report has no voice of its own until you loan it yours. Picture instead a second woman, checking that very same small number, feeling the same little flinch anyone would feel. And then, instead of letting that flinch narrate her whole day, quietly saying to herself, this is only a photograph. It is not my future. My supply is not contained in this account. That woman may still pay the very same bills that afternoon. She has not denied a single fact, but she has refused to let the fact become her decree. So today, before you check any number, decide first what you intend to speak over your day, and then let the number be exactly what it is, without letting it edit your mouth afterward. You can look directly at a small balance and still say, out loud or under your breath, my supply is unlimited, even now, because supply was never actually housed in that account. The account is only one outlet among many, a single narrow pipe, while the source behind it has always been wider than any one number could ever measure. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that when you stop worshipping the visible figure, the invisible source behind it is finally free to move through new and unexpected channels. A refund arrives, a forgotten check surfaces, an opportunity opens that has nothing to do with the account you are staring at. This is my decree. No number gets to write my sentences for me. The third key is this: speak your good in the grammar of the present, not the grammar of someday. A decree is never spoken as a future hope. It is spoken as an already accomplished fact. And this single grammatical shift is far more powerful than it sounds. Think of a queen. She does not say, someday I will wear my crown. She wears it now, because the crown was never something she was waiting to earn. It was already hers by right the moment she was recognized as queen. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that your true identity carries exactly that same standing. You are not waiting to become worthy of supply. You are already the child of a kingdom whose resources never run dry. So when you speak, speak as one who already wears the crown. Say, I have abundant supply. Not, I will have abundant supply someday. Say, this position is already mine in the unseen, and now shows itself in the seen. Not, I really hope I get this position. Picture a woman preparing for a job interview who spends the whole car ride saying, I will get it, I will get it. and compare her to a woman who instead says, calmly, "This opportunity already belongs to me in spirit, and I now watch it appear in form." The second woman walks in, already occupying the position in consciousness. And consciousness, Florence Scovel Shinn taught, is the one thing that never fails to reproduce itself outwardly. Someday is a word that keeps your good forever on the horizon, but now is the word that pulls it into your hand. And notice how someday quietly multiplies itself the moment you let it in. Someday I will have savings, becomes someday I will feel secure, becomes someday things will finally settle down. And years can slip by, while every good thing you name stays parked on that same distant horizon, never once arriving because it was never once summoned. Think of a man who has said for 3 straight years, "Someday I will get out of debt," and meanwhile a neighbor, in far worse circumstances on paper, quietly says each morning, "I am already free, I am already provided for." And within that same 3 years, the neighbor's whole situation has turned. Not because the neighbor worked some rare miracle, but because the neighbor's mouth kept building, in the present tense, while the other man's mouth kept building on a horizon that never gets any closer, no matter how long you walk toward it. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the subconscious mind cannot build with someday, because someday has no shape, it has no address. It is not a place the law can deliver anything to, but now has an address. Now is exactly where you are standing. So practice this today. Wherever you catch yourself saying "I will," gently correct it to "I have," and watch how differently the sentence sits in your body. Feel the small settling in your chest when you say "it is already mine," instead of "it will someday be mine." That settling is not imagination. Florence Scovel Shinn taught it is recognition. The true self remembering what was always already true. This is my decree. My good is not coming someday. It is already mine, right now. The fourth key is this, and it may be the most quietly life-changing one so far. Your subconscious mind does not average your day. It does not sit back and weigh your good sentences against your bad ones and hand you some fair middle result. It executes literally whatever you hand it, moment by moment, sentence by sentence. The way a factory floor simply produces whatever the order sheet says, without asking whether the order sheet makes sense. And if your day is full of contradictory decrees, you will keep receiving a life that looks exactly like that contradiction, scattered, uncertain, pulling in 6 directions at once. Let us walk through an ordinary day the way Florence Scovel Shinn might have asked you to examine it. At 7 in the morning you wake up, and before your feet even touch the floor, you sigh and say, "Here we go again, another day of barely getting by." That is a decree. At 9 o'clock you open your email, see a bill, and mutter, "I will never get ahead of these." That is a decree. At noon, you sit down to lunch with a co-worker who is complaining about money, and instead of staying quiet, you agree loudly, saying, "Tell me about it. It is impossible out here right now." That is a decree. At 3 in the afternoon, you feel a small flicker of hope. You think, well, maybe things will turn around eventually. That is a weaker decree, but it is still a decree. And at 6 in the evening, you scroll past a lottery number and think, if only. That is a decree too. A wish dressed up as a decree with no real conviction behind it. By the end of that single day, you have spoken 5 or 6 different, contradictory decrees, none of them definite, all of them pulling against each other, and then you wonder, sincerely, why your outer life feels so scattered, so stuck, so hard to move. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the subconscious mind is like fertile soil that will grow whatever seed is planted in it most often and most emotionally, and a day scattered with 5 contradicting seeds cannot produce one clear harvest. It produces exactly what it was given, confusion. And here is another way to see the very same truth. Picture an orchestra where every musician is reading from a different sheet of music at the same time. One plays a slow and mournful piece. Another plays something bright and hurried. Another simply taps out worry on the same note over and over. No conductor alive could turn that into a symphony. And yet this is precisely what so many people ask of their own subconscious mind, every single day. 6 different songs, and then genuine confusion about why the music of their life sounds like noise instead of harmony. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the mind cannot serve 2 masters any more gracefully than that orchestra can serve 6 composers at once. It will simply play whatever is loudest, or whatever is repeated most often, or whatever carries the most feeling behind it. Now here is the good news hidden inside this same key. You do not need a perfect day free of every negative thought. That is not the standard. And reaching for that standard is its own kind of exhausting request. What you actually need is far simpler than that. One dominant, deliberate decree, spoken with feeling at the start of your day, strong enough to stand as the ruling authority over every smaller stray thought that tries to speak after it. Think of it the way a single tuning fork, struck clearly, can bring an entire room of instruments into agreement around it, not because it shouted louder than everything else, but because it was struck first, and struck true. So picture starting your morning, before you check your phone, before you check the balance, before the world gets a single word in edgewise, and saying out loud or under your breath, "Today, I am governed by supply, not by lack. Today, my word is the final word over my circumstances." That single decree, spoken with real feeling first thing, becomes like a king seated on the throne of your day, and every stray worried thought that tries to speak after it has to bow to it, instead of overruling it. This does not mean stray thoughts will never come. They will. You are human. Doubts will still knock. Bills will still arrive. Co-workers will still complain over lunch. But a thought that comes after a decree already reigning has far less power than a thought that comes first and unopposed. It is not that the negative thought disappears from your day entirely. It is that it no longer sits on the throne. So pause for a moment right now and pick one real morning ritual you can change this week. Maybe it is the very first sentence you say when your alarm goes off. Maybe it is the first thing you say before opening your laptop. Maybe it is simply the sentence you speak while the coffee brews. Choose it, and let that be the seat of your daily decree from now on. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the one who rules the first word of the day quietly rules the whole day that follows, and this is worth returning to whenever the day tries to scatter you again. This is my decree. My first word each morning is the ruling word over everything that follows it. Take a breath with me for just a moment. If this teaching is helping you build a life that answers to your word, subscribe now so the next teaching finds you the moment it is ready. The 5th key is this, and it is short on purpose. Watch for the counter decree, because one strong decree spoken at dawn can be quietly cancelled by a single doubtful sentence spoken at lunch. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that doubt is not simply an absence of faith, it is an active decree of its own, spoken in the opposite direction, with just as much creative power as the decree it is working against. Imagine decreeing at 7 in the morning, "My supply flows freely to me," feeling the words settle warm and certain in your chest, and then at noon, while paying a bill, sighing and saying, "I will never really get ahead of these things." That second sentence did not just sit there quietly beside the first one, it went to work exactly the way the first one did, undoing it thread by thread, the way water undoes a line drawn in sand. And by evening you cannot understand why you feel just as anxious as you did before you ever decreed anything at all. This is why some people practice a decree faithfully for one whole week and then quietly give up, convinced it does not work, when in truth it was working, but it was met, hour by hour, by an equal and opposite decree, spoken with just as much feeling behind it. Think of a woman driving home from that same bill payment, muttering under her breath that she will always be behind, never once noticing that she has just planted a second seed directly on top of her first one, and wondering later why her garden grows nothing but weeds. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the cure here is not shame, it is simply awareness. Catch the counter-decree the moment it rises in your throat. And instead of scolding yourself for having a human moment of fear, gently say, "Cancel that," and restate your original decree right there on the spot. Out loud if you can, quietly if you must. Cancel that, "My supply flows freely to me." That is the whole practice. Small, immediate, undramatic, and it is enough, because a decree that is defended the moment it is threatened stays whole, while a decree that is left undefended slowly bleeds out through 100 small, doubtful sentences you never even noticed you were speaking. This is my decree. No doubtful sentence gets the final word over my day. The sixth key is this: know which part of you is actually doing the decreeing, because not every voice inside you carries royal authority. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that there is a frightened, outer self in each of us. The self that flinches at bills, that rehearses worst-case scenarios, that begs and bargains and apologizes for wanting more. And there is also a true self, steady, whole, already connected to a supply that has never once run dry. When the frightened self tries to issue a decree, it comes out sounding like a servant giving royal orders, and no one in the unseen kingdom is required to obey a servant's decree. It has no throne behind it. But when the true self speaks, even in a whisper, it carries the full authority of the king it was always joined to. So the real question is never simply what words did you say. The question is, which self said them? Picture a man who loses his job and immediately says, out loud, "I am doomed. I will never recover from this." That sentence is spoken by the frightened self, trembling, and it carries the shaky authority of a servant. Now picture that same man, an hour later, taking a breath, remembering who he really is beneath the fear, and saying instead, "This closes one door, because a better one is already opening. I am always provided for." That second sentence is spoken by the true self, and it carries the full weight of the throne. Notice that both sentences came out of the very same mouth, on the very same day, about the very same circumstance, which tells you something important. The words alone were never the whole story. The self standing behind the words was the real author the entire time. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is why two people can lose the same amount of money and live out two completely different futures, not because one of them found better words somewhere, but because one of them kept speaking from the trembling servant, while the other, at some point, remembered the crowned self and let that self take over the conversation. Think also of a woman sitting at her kitchen table with her family, discussing a tight month, and hear how easily fear speaks first in a room like that. Someone says, "We simply cannot afford it," and three other voices quietly agree, each one adding a little more weight to the servant's version of the story, until the whole table has decreed lack together without ever calling it a decree. But that same woman could just as easily say, "We are provided for," and let us think clearly about our next step. And though the circumstance in front of her has not changed by one single dollar, the self now speaking through her has changed completely. Pause for a moment now and pick one fear you have been carrying about money, something specific, a bill, a bad month, a shrinking account, and notice which self usually speaks about it inside your mind. Is it the trembling servant, rehearsing the worst before it has even arrived? Or is it the still, crowned self, quiet and unshaken beneath the noise? Once you can see the difference clearly, you can choose, every single time, which one gets to speak next. And this choosing is not a one-time event. It is a practice. Some mornings the servant will speak first out of old habit, and that is all right. You simply pause, breathe, and let the true self answer back before the servant's words get to stand as the final word. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this true self is the same self Scripture calls the Christ within. not a distant historical figure, but the very real, unshaken center of your own being, always present, never frightened, never scarce. And when you decree from that center, the words are no longer just your opinion about your circumstances. They are law. This is my decree. I speak from the still, crowned self, not the trembling one. The seventh key is this, and it is the deepest one. So let us walk it together slowly, the way Florence Scovel Shinn herself would have unpacked a single verse, turning it over and over until every layer gave up its light. First, consider the decree itself. The verse does not say, "Thou shalt also wish a thing." It does not say, "Thou shalt also hint at a thing." It does not even say, "Thou shalt also hope very hard for a thing." It says decree, and a decree by its very nature is definite. It names one specific outcome and does not leave three vague possibilities standing around it waiting to be chosen from. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that vague prayers produce vague results, because the subconscious mind cannot build a clear house from a blueprint that keeps changing its own dimensions. If you decree, "I want more money somehow," the unseen has an entire ocean of possible somehows to pour that word through, and it may choose one you never wanted, a loss that technically frees up a little cash, a small accident that saves you money you did not want to save that way. But if you decree, "My rent is paid in full and on time, with ease," you have given the law a door narrow enough and clear enough to walk through cleanly. Think of a young man who needed exactly $1,100 for his tuition by the end of the month, and instead of saying, "I hope something works out financially," he sat quietly and said, "$1,100 comes to me easily, and by the date I need it." That sentence had edges to it. It had a shape the unseen could actually build around, and he told later how it arrived from a source he never would have guessed, a small refund he had forgotten he was owed, arriving on almost the exact day. So the first movement of this key asks you to make your decrees definite, not desperate, not misty, definite. Name the number, name the outcome, name the date if it is fitting, and stop handing the universe a question mark to sort out on your behalf. A second, consider the establishing, the verse continues, "and it shall be established unto thee." And establishing takes real time, even though the decree itself is spoken in a single instant. Think of a seed dropped into dark soil. The moment it is planted, its entire future shape is already decided in seed form. The whole oak tree is already fully present, folded up small, inside that one acorn. But it does not shoot up out of the ground that very same afternoon. It disappears from sight first. It does its most important work in complete darkness, underground, patiently, unseen by anyone standing above. And this is exactly where so many good decrees are quietly murdered before they ever get the chance to become anything. Someone speaks their decree with real feeling on a Monday, checks the ground again on Tuesday morning, sees no visible sprout anywhere, and quietly concludes that nothing is happening. So by Wednesday, they are digging the seed back up out of sheer anxiety just to inspect its roots. And in doing exactly that, they kill the very thing they were so hopeful about. Only 2 days earlier, picture two gardeners planting the very same kind of seed on the very same morning. One gardener walks past her plot once a day, waters it lightly, and simply trusts the dark soil to do what dark soil has always known how to do. The other gardener cannot stand not knowing. So every evening he kneels down and brushes the dirt aside, just far enough to check whether anything has started forming yet. And because he keeps disturbing the one condition a seed actually needs, which is undisturbed darkness, his plot lies bare long after hers is already pushing up its first green shoot. And neither gardener would ever say out loud, "I am digging up my own harvest." And yet that is precisely what the second one is doing, night after night, with the very best of intentions. Picture also a woman who decreed clearly that a certain debt would be cleared before the season changed. She spoke it once with feeling, and then Every single evening after that, she opened her account and stared at the balance, sighing when it had not moved. And in doing that nightly staring, she was digging up her own seed again and again, without ever calling it that. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that a decree, once spoken with feeling, must then be released the way a farmer releases a planted seed to the dark earth, and simply trusts the process, without daily unearthing it out of worry. This waiting season is not punishment, it is gestation. It is precisely the establishing spoken of in the verse, and your only real assignment during it is to keep restating your decree with quiet confidence, while you stop checking the soil with anxious, trembling hands. Notice, too, that gestation always has its own timing. An acorn does not rush itself into an oak overnight, simply because the gardener is impatient. And a decree does not establish itself 1 hour sooner, simply because you have grown tired of waiting. The timing belongs to the law, not to your nerves. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that peace during this exact season is itself a kind of faith in motion, a silent decree layered on top of the first one, saying in effect, I trust what I cannot yet see. Third, consider the light shining upon thy ways, because this is the part almost everyone reads past too quickly. The verse does not end at established, it continues further, and the light shall shine upon thy ways, meaning that once a decree is truly planted and left undisturbed long enough, the outer world itself begins quietly rearranging to match it, not through your own frantic scrambling and pushing, but through what Florence Scovel Shinn called divine right action moving on your behalf. Doors you did not even know existed suddenly stand open in front of you. A phone call comes through at precisely the right moment. A stranger casually mentions the exact opportunity you needed, without having any idea why they even brought it up. A bill is unexpectedly reduced. An old debt is unexpectedly forgiven outright. This is the light finding your ways. And notice, it always shows up after the underground season, never once before it. So if you are living right now in a season where you have decreed clearly, released it fully, and still see no visible sprout breaking the surface, hear this gently. You are not failing at all. You are simply still underground. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that the underground season is very often the season where the truest work of all is happening, completely unseen, because roots must always grow downward long before anything is permitted to grow upward. Think of a man who decreed steady work for himself after months of uncertainty, and for 6 long weeks, nothing on the surface changed at all. No calls, no offers, no sign, and then in a single week, 3 separate opportunities arrived almost at once, not because those 6 weeks were wasted, but because they were the very weeks his roots were quietly reaching down into soil he could not see. The light did not skip those 6 weeks. It was simply doing its work, below where his eyes could not yet follow it. Fourth, consider that small word tucked right into the middle of the verse. Established unto thee, not unto everyone, not unto the world in general, unto thee, personally, specifically, by name. And Florence Scovel Shinn taught that this is no small detail. Your decree is not competing with anyone else's decree for some limited pool of good. Because supply was never a single pie sliced thin among many hungry hands, it is a living, ever-renewing source that meets each true decree exactly where it was addressed. So when you decree, you are not asking to be chosen out of a crowd. You are simply naming what already belongs to your own individual life, the way a key is cut to fit one particular lock and no other. So pause for a moment right now and pick one real decree you spoke recently that you have quietly been digging back up out of worry. Name it honestly to yourself and simply decide today to leave it buried and trust it instead. Put all 4 movements together now, and you can finally see the whole verse the way it was always meant to be seen. First you decree, definite and unafraid, with edges clear enough to be built upon. Second, you release that decree into the dark, and let it establish without ever digging it up again to inspect it. Third, you watch quietly and expectantly for the light that always eventually shines upon the ways of the one who has done this faithfully and without panic. And fourth, you remember that every bit of it was addressed unto thee alone, needing no one else's permission and competing with no one else's good. This is not luck, Florence Scovel Shinn taught. Luck was always simply this exact mechanism wearing a disguise, so that it could be dismissed by people who preferred not to believe their own spoken word carried this much real authority. This is my decree, I plant it, I release it, and I trust the light to find my ways in its own perfect timing. The eighth key is this: guard your decree the way you would guard something newly planted. Because Florence Scovel Shinn taught that a decree spoken with real conviction and then immediately handed over to every doubting voice around you rarely survives the conversation. She taught that the newly spoken word is tender, still forming, still finding its shape in the unseen, and that tenderness is precisely why it needs quiet more than it needs an audience. Imagine a woman who decrees quietly one morning, "My new position is already mine in the unseen," and feels genuinely lighter for it, lighter in her shoulders, lighter in her walk to the car. And then at lunch, sitting across from a friend, she feels that old familiar urge to share it, half proud, half nervous. So she tells her, and the friend, meaning no real harm at all, says, "Well, you know how competitive that field is. Don't get your hopes up too high." And something in the woman quietly deflates right there at the table, not because the friend was cruel, but because a doubt spoken aloud by another voice has a strange way of finding every small doubt already living quietly inside us and joining hands with it, and together the two of them can easily outweigh a decree that was, only an hour earlier, standing perfectly strong and whole on its own. This is exactly why Florence Scovel Shinn counseled such careful silence around a freshly spoken decree. Not secrecy born of shame, never that, but protection born of wisdom, the way a farmer does not invite the whole village to walk their boots across a freshly planted field just to admire the dirt. Think also of a photograph still developing in a darkroom. If the door is opened even once, even for a curious moment, even by someone who only wanted to see how it was coming along, the whole image is ruined before it ever has the chance to fully appear. A decree behaves the very same way while it is still forming. Every doubting glance let in too soon exposes it before its time. Consider too the businessman who decrees, quietly, "This contract is already mine," and then spends the entire evening explaining his reasoning to every relative at the dinner table, inviting their opinions, their warnings, their cousin's second-hand story about a deal that once fell through. By the time dinner ends, he is no longer standing in his decree at all. He is standing in a small crowd of other people's fears, wearing his own words as a disguise. And notice, he did not lose his good fortune to bad luck. He simply handed it over, sentence by sentence, to every voice at that table who had never once decreed anything for themselves. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that most people are not trying to harm your decree when they question it. They are only speaking from their own history of disappointment, but their history is not required to become your future simply because you let it sit down at your table. So this week, choose your decrees, and then choose your company around them, just as carefully as you chose the words themselves. You do not owe anyone a report on what you are quietly believing for. Not your family, not your co-workers, not even the well-meaning friend across the table. If someone asks how things are going, you can simply smile, gently change the subject, or say, "I am trusting that it is working out," and leave the rest unspoken. You might even find it helpful to keep a private page somewhere, just for you, where your decrees can be written down and spoken back to yourself in the quiet, rather than handed out loud to a room that was never asked to hold them. This is not dishonesty, Florence Scovel Shinn taught. It is stewardship. It is tending the seed rather than digging it up to show visitors its roots. And it means that when the light finally does shine upon your ways, exactly as the earlier key promised it would, it shines upon something that was kept whole and undisturbed the entire quiet season it was establishing. This is my decree. I keep what is sacred to me quiet until it is ready to be seen. The ninth key is this. And it brings everything full circle. Gratitude is the final and most powerful decree of all. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that when you say thank you for a thing before it has fully appeared in the visible world, you are not being naive, you are issuing the most confident decree a human voice can make, because gratitude spoken in advance says, plainly, I already consider this settled. And settled is exactly the word this entire teaching has been circling since the very first line. Think of a woman waiting on a check that has not yet arrived. She has two ways to spend that waiting. She can spend it wringing her hands, checking the mailbox 3 times a day, asking everyone she knows whether they think it will really come through, or she can spend that same waiting, quietly saying, "Thank you, this is already mine," and going about her day in peace. Both women are waiting the exact same number of days, but only one of them is decreeing while she waits, and the other is simply begging in silence, dressed up to look like patience. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that thanksgiving is the outward sign that the inward decree has already been believed, and belief, not the calendar, is what determines how quickly a thing establishes itself in the seen world. So today, find one thing in your life that still feels uncertain, a bill not yet paid, a door not yet opened, a wound not yet healed, and instead of asking anxiously whether it will work out, simply say thank you for it as though it already has. Thank you that my supply flows freely. Thank you that my ways are already lit by a light I trust completely. Thank you that this very thing I have decreed is even now on its way to me by the shortest, straightest path. And feel how different that sentence sits in your chest compared to a worried, pleading one. This is the difference we began with, way back at the very start of this teaching. Money and every form of true supply were never moved by requests. They answer to a decree, spoken plainly, spoken definitely, spoken with grateful confidence, and left alone to establish exactly as Scripture always said it would. And gratitude is simply that decree, wearing its finest robe. This is my decree. I am grateful now, for what my word has already made mine. Here is the whole picture. It is not that money refuses the polite. It is that money cannot hear the uncertain. It is not that your circumstances have real authority over your mouth. It is that you kept handing them the pen. It is not someday. It is now. It is not 5 scattered decrees a day. It is one ruling decree spoken first. It is not the trembling servant who speaks your life into being. It is the still, crowned self who has never once been afraid. It is not a decree dug up daily to check on it. It is a decree planted, released and trusted through its own quiet underground season until the light finds your ways. It is not gossip that protects a fresh decree. It is a guarded, quiet confidence. And it is not a worried question asked at the end. It is a grateful thank you spoken in advance. Every single key we have opened today was never 9 separate keys at all. It was one key, turned 9 different ways, and that one key is simply this. Your word is not a request. It was always meant to be a decree. If this teaching has stirred something steady and certain in you today, the Overflow Covenant was built to keep that steadiness alive week after week. It is a gentle, guided path through Florence Scovel Shinn's teaching on the spoken word, on consciousness, and on supply, with a new decree and a new practice for every season your life moves through. It is available today for a simple one-time gift of $37, fully backed by a 30-day guarantee, so there is truly nothing to risk and only a steadier, more established life to gain. You will find the link in the description below this video. waiting for you whenever you feel ready to walk further. Say it with me, one final time. I decree my good, and it is already mine. I do not beg for what is already appointed to me. My word is my wand. Money was never moved by a request. It has always been waiting for your decree. So speak it plainly today, and let the light quietly find your ways.